Hey, good afternoon, good evening, good night, as I always say, wherever you're listening from, wherever you're watching from. This globe has different time, and we recognize that even in the United States there are different time zones, and we have to appreciate that. So I greet you like that. You know, look into the mirror and look at yourself and ask yourself the question: do I have any limitations? It's critical for us to ask ourselves that question from time to time, and also to reflect on how others see us with limitations. And yeah, I really mean doing that reflection, but trying to go against the expectation of others, because sometimes we have limitations, and people around us, even family members, do not expect us to do well with the limitations that we have, and we need to prove them wrong. So if you have a limitation today, just look into the mirror and tell yourself that you're going to prove others wrong as it relates to their expectations, in regards to the limitation or limitations that you have. My guest today, she has a limitation, but guess what happened? She's a superwoman. Yeah, she I've talked with her before. She's very optimistic. She does things that others believe that it's impossible for her to do, and she proved them wrong. And she's going to be talking to me today, as it relates to how she gets that done, and her whole optimism, and we'd want to hear her out, and what the limitations are. Our limitation is, she will let us know more about that. And I'm sure that after I finish talking to my guest, you will look back in that mirror and say, hey, guess what happened? I am going to do well. I am going to go against my limitations and the expectations that others have, as it relates to my limitation. So I'm going to let my guest in, Shelly. Shelly Houser, what's
Yay!
up? Hey, Shelly, it's nice to have you again on Canute Exploration, your topic in a podcast. I am Dr. Canute White. Shelly, one of the things that I'd like to talk to you about before we go into this, your childhood Shelly, your little Shelly, growing up, 5 year old, 7 year old. Tell me about that.
Well, I'll even go back further. My disability is congenital hemipelvectomy,
Mm-hmm.
which means I was naturally born without my right hip or my right leg.
Wow.
I also have scoliosis in my spine and lordosis. So my
Mm-hmm.
spine grew over my left leg and is pushed forwards towards my belly button. So it's all kinds of twisted up. But when I was 6 months old, I got my first prosthetic leg. And little Shelly had like no knee. It was this really little leg with a strap around my waist. And I fumbled and crawled around and figured out my life from a very early stage. And I became a problem solver even back in the 70s when I was born. And growing up was a real challenge, in not just physically, but mentally. And society wasn't really kind in the 70s and the 80s and into the 90s. But I persevered and I thought, I'm going to go to college. And I did. And I wanted to get married and I did. And I got a job and I did. And we had children.
Yeah.
We have three beautiful boys despite my congenital amputation. And so today's show, and thank you so much for having me today, Dr. White, is about
You're welcome.
perseverance and being optimistic and overcoming and achieving and believing in ourselves and empowering ourselves. Yeah.
I like to ask you this question. You're married, right? You said you're married.
25 years now.
Right. My audience would like to know, because in general, culturally, persons believe that, okay, if the female or the male for that matter has a disability,
Yep.
then the person who is able would not want to mate with that person.
Yep.
Talk to me about that.
So I think it's about my attitude with my disability and how I look at the world and how I look at myself. And I grew up with very strong women in my life, which helped build my tribe and who I am and how I believed in myself. And don't get me wrong, everybody. It People say nasty things, young and old, and society can be very cruel at all ages. But I learned that that's their problem. If they have a problem with my prosthetic, or they have a problem with how I walk, or how I am a little slower, or I have to do things a little differently, that's on them. That's their problem, because I'm not going to be able to change. And why should I have to change who I am to make somebody else more comfortable with who I am? That's on them. So I went to college, had my friends, and asked this one fella out, and he said, "Oh, I already have a girlfriend, but I want to introduce you to my cousin Rob." I'm like, "Oh boy, everybody's got this great cousin." So he was studying German in Austria, and he came home and joined us back at college the next semester. He turned out to be a pretty okay kind of guy. So we stayed friends, and the group of us, there were about 5 of us in college, and we stayed friends all these years. And I just got a little friendlier with Rob. So we we got married in 1996.
Yeah.
We were college friends, and then we were post-college lovers, and then we got married, and a year and a half later we had our first son.
Wow.
So, and it is hard. Now, I will admit that my husband, I said I love you first,
Yeah.
and I didn't expect him to say it, and that was fine.
Yeah.
But he did admit after we got engaged that it had taken him 6 months to sit back and pause. Did he want to get in a relationship with a person with a physical disability?
Yeah.
And I commended him for that. I didn't yell and scream and say, "Well, why wouldn't you?" Because he didn't know. And heck, I don't even know how I'm going to age and what I'm going to be like in another 30 years from now. We all have our good days, able-bodied or disabled.
Yeah.
But we all have our bad days too. And things come up. But you think of that 1 in 4, at least Americans, and 15% of the planet have a mental or physical disability.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So, we're all going to get there, and disabilities are going to catch up to us eventually in life.
Yeah.
So I'm glad that he took the time to consider my disability and how that was going to impact. But I always keep guessing. I mean, having 3 children and not a miscarriage amongst them, which is a blessing.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
And working and pulling my part of the relationship in. But I see my friends and family with other disabilities, and
Mm-hmm.
You make it work. Nobody's perfect.
Yeah. Yeah.
Dr. White, do you know anybody that is physically or mentally perfect in your life?
Oh no. No,
Yeah.
there's always some sort of limitation in life. Right.
We
Yeah.
always have something.
We also have some sort of limitation. And that is why, Shelly, I started out like this in the introduction, saying, hey, that limitation that my audience have, that you have, you need to consider it as something you can step over and really do your best to be you, who you want to be. Limitations, and I want you to comment on this. Limitations should never stop you.
No.
You should be more powerful than those limitations. What do you say?
We should. And I think growing up this way, I didn't have the village of support that I've built, whether it's friends or family or coworkers. But we have to say, okay, this is the life that I was given. And according to the Bible, we are all made in God's likeness. So we are created the way we are meant to be.
Yeah.
And my journey is different than anybody else's, but I'm finding my purpose in life. And it has a lot to do with disability advocacy and educating the able-bodied community, whether it's occupational nurses or our local police force in the city, of just more awareness, more ways to be kind, more ways to take a different approach and a different look at how to work with and talk to and talk about persons with mental or physical disabilities. And so it's empowering me by giving myself that voice and educating the able-bodied society. It's I'm giving back, but I'm also learning more about myself with the questions that they're asking me, and it's empowering me. And it's this little inertia kind of circle that's going around. And here that I do it, I get stronger and I get wiser and I learn and I put more of that skill and that knowledge in my little toolbox of life. And it's just, I'm finding my purpose the second half of my life. And
Yeah.
it's turning into something pretty wonderful. So
So
we're
the
not born like this. We have to learn to find our way
yeah,
in our journey.
definitely. So the criticism, Shelley, should help us to grow around our limitations. The criticism, the stigma, the biases, those aggressions, should help us to grow around our limitations, to at least become more transformed into a person who is more powerful to push the limitations behind us.
Microaggressions and micro experiences are a funny little thing. Sometimes able-bodied society will say, you get around pretty good for being an amputee.
Yeah.
I'll be like, thanks. You get around pretty well for wearing glasses and artificial teeth.
Yeah.
You chew pretty good for having false teeth. So,
Yeah.
they don't mean it. They don't see it. But I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
it comes from lack of education.
Yeah.
I think it comes from being nervous around something that makes them visually
Yeah.
uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't know how else to say it. So they think that's the answer that we want to hear.
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily. I think genuine curiosity, if somebody approaches any of us in the community and says, hey, tell me about your leg. That's a really cool leg. It's really cool color today. Tell me about it. We're always going to be open to sharing our story. We're always going to want to connect with somebody else. And you never know. If you're nice enough, you may say, my mom's going to lose her leg next week, and I'm really nervous about it. And I've had that. And I'm like, oh, well, tell me more about that. And just that 5-10 minutes that you spend with that person really can open up their whole world of knowledge and respect for somebody in the disability community and how they look at us differently. Yeah. And they're like, okay, that was I finally had a really good conversation with an amputee, and I just didn't know. So it's, but microaggressions and micro experiences can be very, very hurtful.
Yeah.
I had a micro experience when I was pregnant with our first son, and my socket goes around my waist, and I was not able to wear my prosthetic past 3 months pregnant. And the two micro experiences I had was the first one, I was 6 months pregnant on crutches. I had this big old belly, and it was a beautiful June day, and I was going into the store, and this older white gentleman says to me, what kind of mother are you going to be? Who would get you pregnant, and how are you going to care for that child? Who do you think you are getting pregnant? Well, first of all, I never met this man, never saw him ever again. And second of all, it wasn't any of his darn business.
Yeah.
Who got me pregnant or what my experience or life experience was, whether or not I had a partner or a spouse. And that was the first time I really spoke up at 28 years old.
Yeah.
And I stood up for myself. And I tell you, I was shaking like a leaf, like an aspen tree in the fall. But I empowered myself that day.
Yeah.
I stood up for myself that day. And it felt pretty darn good, because then I said, I'm strong.
Yeah.
And I don't need somebody's approval to live my life and have the life experiences that I want with my partner. And being a mother was really important to me because I wanted to see that I could do it. And then the second micro experience I had was once I had John, our first son.
Okay.
The insurance company said to me that they couldn't validate making me a new socket to go around my waist to get me back on two legs because I wasn't working, and I was just an at-home mother. And I had to lose all the weight without knowing how to run, because I couldn't. I couldn't do sit-ups because I don't have that right hip structure, so I would be crunching on my tailbone all the time. That would hurt. And I just didn't have the strength to do it. So, and I didn't know how to.
Right.
I didn't have the right physical body to do what I needed to do to lose the weight. So it was a challenge for several more months to a year until I lost enough weight. But I did it, and I persevered.
Well done.
I proved to myself that I could do it. And then the next two pregnancies, I was in that leg longer because I advocated for myself, even when the doctors in the medical field didn't know what to do with me. I said, okay, this is what we're going to do. We're going to cut the socket back. We're going to make a stirrup and we're going to
Yeah.
make it work. And I delivered 2 more full-term 7.5-pound children after that first pregnancy. That was
Wow.
a disastrous emergency. Because he was a 32-weeker when he was born. He was a little over 3 pounds. He was very, very tiny.
Hmm.
All about digging in and believing in yourself
Yeah.
and empowering yourself and saying, I know the world around me is saying I can't, but even if you just start to say, I think I can.
Yeah.
And then try and try and try. I mean, you don't wake up a millionaire. You don't wake up famous, right?
Mm-hmm.
You don't wake up a doctor, right?
Yeah. Right. No. God. Yeah.
Baby steps. You go, okay, I'm going to get to step A to step B and then B to C and C to, until you're at Z.
Yeah.
Then you've got it. And you adjust and you fix, but you empower and educate and believe in yourself. Like that little train that could. I think I can do this.
Right.
I'm not so bad at this. Wow, I can do this. Wow, look at me. And it just takes that self-awareness and believing in yourself and empowering yourself until you get where you want to be.
Definitely. This is Canute Exploration, your topic in the podcast. I'm Dr. Canute White, sitting in with Shelly. Shelly, I want you to explain again, right? Your condition.
Okay.
Right? Because we're putting it out there. And I have a question to ask you after you explain.
Absolutely. So for your listeners, I was born 1 in 8 million. I am a congenital hemi-pelvectomy, which means I was born without my right hip and right leg. So there was nothing there. My spine chose to grow over my left hip that I do have. And so I have scoliosis, and that got worse after 3 children. And I have lordosis because my lower 2 discs off my tailbone never finished developing and closing completely. And so that is my condition. And I've lived with it my whole life. I've got my first prosthetic at 6 months. So, and I'm pretty active considering.
Right. And those of you who are not seeing Shelly, right? If you're listening on your favorite podcast platform, she's very active. She's okay. If you look at Shelly, you would not know that she has a limitation.
Right.
Right? Right, Shelly? Yeah. So Shelly, my thing, were you afraid of having that child, that the first pregnancy? Were there any fear at all in your headspace? Were you afraid?
That's a great question. Thanks for asking it. I thought about adopting children.
Okay.
Because it's a wonderful thing to do. And there's a lot of beautiful children that need a home. Yeah. And my husband had his own apprehensions. So we as a couple decided to have children naturally. And I think he was more nervous than I was, to be honest. I was excited. Yeah. And he said, how are we going to do that? And I said, we'll have the conversation about the little birds and the bees, but we're going to do it like every other couple. So I had a ton of x-rays every 6 months. Okay. My first 18 years of life when I went to Shriners Hospital in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And it was on my scoliosis. So they weren't protecting my ovaries at that time growing up. So while they were protecting my scoliosis and my disability, they weren't looking out for my future reproductive health. Yeah. Right. So it took us a year to get pregnant with our first son and about 3 months with our second son. And I just believed in the process. And I just felt I can do this. I just need some help. And like usual, I just need to do things a little differently. And it may take me a little more time, but I'm going to do this. And we got pregnant. And each pregnancy was beautiful. And I was so grateful for each child I was able to give life to. Mm-hmm. And I just ate really healthy and I took really good care of myself. And I made sure I was confident in the shoes that I wore to make sure that I was on stable ground. And I just listened to my body. Yeah. And did that. But yeah, I think my husband was more freaked out about the whole process than I was.
Yeah, I understand that. Shelly, I have a friend at this time while we are talking. Her daughter is in Florida in a hospital here in Florida. Okay. She's an adolescent. She's having a challenge as well, MS, and they're doing a number of surgery on her, and it's really a miserable time for her. and her mother. I am saying this to say that what would you suggest or would you advise that teenager who is going to be having a bit of challenge now as she go through?
You know, there were times when I went to Shriners and I'd sit there, I'd drive 2 hours to get there, 2 hours to get home. I'd sit there sometimes 2, 3 hours for a doctor to look at me in my underwear, which was really embarrassing at that age, for like 10 minutes. And then I'd have to go home. And it was every 6 months I was doing that. Her life has massive worth, more than she knows right now.
Yeah.
And this journey that she's on probably doesn't seem fair, and it doesn't seem right. And she probably just wants to be an average teenager doing all the average things. But she's bonding with her mom.
Yeah.
And she's learning about herself, and she needs to be grateful with the body that she's been given a life, and for as independent as she can be at this time. This journey that she's on will teach her something about herself, and it'll be much different than my journey. But my father always said I was born to do something great, and only now in my 50s am I learning what that really means. And I'm finding my journey, and I'm still discovering things about myself. So it is a process. And we as persons with mental or physical disabilities need to be grateful for even the little things that we have every day, the independent things that we can do for ourselves every day, even if it's not running a marathon. Even if it's just getting up and getting dressed and feeding ourselves and getting ourselves in our wheelchair. That you celebrate that you can do that yourself at any age, and be patient and be kind to yourself. I wasn't kind enough to myself when I was a teenager, and it wasn't a welcomed thing to talk about my disability when I was growing up. Society is different, not completely different, but it's way more accepting than it used to be. And so she will find her way. She needs to find her village of support, whether it's her friends at school, or family, or other kids with MS. And talk about it and get it out there, and you'll learn and you'll teach and you'll help somebody else that's just starting their journey. You know, she's a year from now, she'll look back and go, okay, I think I've got the hang of this MS thing. But it's kind of her responsibility to reach back for the next one and help that next one along on their journey as well.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. I will ensure that she hears this. I have two questions I need to ask you, two other questions. First, this whole thing about voting, because I realize you're an advocate for disabled persons as well. And this struck me when I saw this about voting rights, right? Voting rights for disabled persons. What's going on with that? Is there a challenge as it relates to voting rights?
Yes.
What's happening? Talk to me about that.
I follow, there's a Canadian disability advocate and journalist by the name of Liz Plank. And I had the honor and joy of interviewing her and all her craziness about a year ago. And I've followed her because she's a really big disability voting rights advocate. You know, when we had our last president, Trump, who I think was atrocious for a lot of the disability community. The website, the United States White House website, pulled anything that had to do with disability advocacy, voting rights, and accessibility ADA rights off their website. And for the 4 years that he had that done the day he was elected into presidency.
Okay.
And that put us back about 30 years with our rights. Yeah. That was pretty atrocious. And I even called and spoke to the White House numerous times about it, and just to, if nothing else, make them aware of the fact that they are infringing on millions of people's rights here in the United States alone. Facilities aren't accessible. They don't offer ramps. And when somebody does show up, and they'll say, oh, well, people with wheelchairs don't really show up anyway. Well, because maybe you don't have ramps, and they take 8 steps to get into a voting building. You know, if somebody with a wheelchair in the United States shows up and you don't have a ramp, by law, you have to offer them privacy and guidance and advocacy. at your polling place. And if not, you need to call in the police and the local constable who oversees that facility on voting day. There is an 800 number out there. If you go to like
Okay.
votespa.gov, if you go to your state or the League of Women Voters in the United States, they're very neutral. They will help find translation phone numbers for numerous other languages.
Okay.
That's a voting problem too. You know,
Yeah.
that they don't know how to translate, and the people that are there can't translate into Spanish or Chinese or Mandarin or Russian. And it's important that every American, no matter what disability, ability, or language they speak, has the same equal rights, whether they're a Republican or a Democrat or an independent. When they are in that poll, they need to be shown, they must, by law, be shown the same amount of privacy and respect as anyone else. There were a lot of new electronic touchscreen, at least in Pennsylvania, touchscreen machines that were offered there. They would have a joystick for people that had maybe hand contractures. There's something you can add your sip and puff if you're a paraplegic, and you can blow on it and you can make your choices through your sip and puff device. You can also put headphones on and it'll speak to you if you're a person with blindness or cataracts and low vision. And so every polling place in state of Pennsylvania has to be trained and have that electronic voting machine up and running. You can't hide it and say, oh, well, nobody's asking for it. By law, they have to have that. And I know numerous other states are implementing those as well. So they can also call their county voting agencies and find out what their options are. Mail by home, mailing mail-in ballots for persons that are maybe bedbound or don't have transportation for lots of reasons, not just disabilities. They too can do mail-in, ballot voting and have their voice counted as well. In other countries, there are different things, but I would check with your local government as to what your voting rights are as a person with a disability, and ask for help, ask for accommodations. There should be rights. I know a lot of other European countries and India, I know they have a lot of good things already implemented for voting rights in other countries.
Oh, cool. That's important. This is Canute Exploration, your topic in the podcast. I'm Dr. Canute White, sitting in with Shelly. Shelly, I'm in Broward County, Florida.
Okay.
Right? I am sure that persons here with disability, living with disability, would have heard what you're saying and, try to reach out to ensure that they have those sort of facilities, the accommodation, when it comes to voting time. But in Jamaica, where I'm from, the culture is a bit different. And, like here, Jamaicans take the voting seriously, right? And they'd want the party that they support to win. And persons would be around the polling station who will assist these persons with disability. If it means lifting an old lady who is in a wheelchair, able-bodied men will do that in Jamaica at the community polling stations. I suspect that it goes there too. But the point I'm trying to make is that persons will be there to assist, despite the fact that governments, right, the political directorate, the onus is on them to ensure that persons with disabilities have the accommodation they need to vote. And that's, as you said, a part of the whole voting right thing.
Yeah. And we can't think of ourselves as secondhand persons of like, oh, there's no ramp here today and I can't get up with my walker or my wheelchair, and therefore I guess I just won't vote today. No. You showed up, and for some persons, they'll be in bed the whole next day because it's so exhausting to get dressed, to get in the vehicle, to get there, to do their voting, waiting in line, and get through and then get back home. And that may be their whole day for energy. I expel 90% more energy just walking. So when I work the polls, it's like a 14, 15-hour day. I'll be out of my prosthetic and on crutches the next day, just working from home because I'm so tired. But I've upheld my democracy. And every person that shows up in every county, you're doing the right thing as a voting abled American, no matter what party you're from, and you're having your voice and your choice heard. And you have the right to do that.
Definitely, definitely. I support the democracy in terms of voting, and everybody should have that right, should exercise that right. It's a part of the American democracy, and the world, most parts of the world are that sort of a freedom, that sort of a right to vote, and we must exercise that. I love what you're doing, and as it relates to voting rights for persons with disability, Shelley. That's I love that. But the other question I have for you is as it relates to the medical simulation that you are involved in. I found that very interesting. Talk to me a bit about that.
Yeah, and I'd love to connect your listeners to more of this work. So I have been blessed working with a hospital on the main line outside of Philadelphia. It's a teaching hospital, and there are thousands of these simulation centers across the United States. And actually, there's some in Europe because I met with some physicians in Poland a few years ago prior to COVID that were starting their own medical simulation centers. So, what these medical simulation centers are is they are always looking for persons with any kind of disability to come in and teach their students, their medical students. And so I go in as an amputee with congestive heart failure or COPD, that I can't breathe with my lungs, or that I've had a baby, or I've pulled my shoulder, rotator cuff shoulder, and how am I going to get my prosthetic leg on? So we do these little acting scenes together, and I get a script, and the nursing students have some basic information about this patient that I'm playing the role.
Okay.
And they come in and they have to assess me, go over my medication, check my vital signs like my heart and my lungs and my pulse. And they get practice of what it's like working with a real patient in a real hospital. So these little practice rooms may look like little mini hospital rooms. And they have to think, okay, when I send this person home, she can't breathe with her lungs or her heart problem, but she has a leg that she has to wear so she's not a fall risk. And yet she expels 90% more energy to walk. What am I going to do for her as a nurse or a doctor? So they have to think about, okay, let's send home therapy. Let's send home a home aid through the insurance company. And they have to think. So it helps them to become better doctors and nurses in the medical field. And like I said, there are these medical simulation centers all over the world that are constantly looking to, some do telehealth now, especially during COVID. We learned that we could do telehealth.
Definitely.
So somebody is at home and cannot get out of their home, but they have a disability. They could still reach out. And there's always grant money that you get paid a little something every hour that you're there. So this could be a lucrative way that somebody that doesn't have transportation, can't get out of their bed, could earn a paycheck, could earn a little bit of something and give back, because these nursing students and med students really need to learn and hear our voices and our challenges and have this little question and empower and educate themselves. And I'll tell you, having that voice and doing that for the last 7-8 years has been phenomenal.
Wow.
It really has given me a voice, and I've learned that society is more accepting to my disability and the challenges that I've had. And I want to keep sharing. And it's been a beautiful journey.
Well, I tell you, and our adversities, I listen to you and I realize that our adversities, our limitations are somebody else's strengths.
Yeah.
And you see, you have been doing so much as it relates to sharing, to helping others, to empowering others because of your limitations. Persons have been doing so well because of your limitations,
Right.
And that is key. And I hope that my listeners will understand that if they do have everybody has a limitation. Use your limitation to help someone else. Talk about your adversities, especially if you have overcome or overcoming, right? Talk to somebody who's still down there to see your best. You can help them to get out of the mud and get clean and ready again. Shelly, it's always nice talking to you. I've talked to you before, and I want you to continue the good work that you have been doing.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for coming on Canute Exploration, your topic in the podcast.
This has been great. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciated it. I do a podcast called Life Beyond the Label, and it's once a month. And I talk to people from all over the world, all different kinds of disabilities and backgrounds. I just had John from John's Crazy Socks. He's a young man that has a sock business, crazy sock business with his dad. And
Okay.
and I tell you, doctor, his little sock business is worth $4 million.
Wow.
And he's not even that man is doing quite well. He is doing great. I've had the blessing of talking to the oldest progeria woman in the world. She lives in Ohio. And progeria is when there's progerin in your blood and you age 10 times faster than everybody else. So at 16, it looked like she was 80.
Wow.
And they usually do not live past their 20s. And she is so blessed and empowered that she is in her 40s. And she is a phenomenal little sprite and a delight for the world.
How do we get your podcast though? How do we find it?
It's on Instagram, Life Beyond the Label _podcast. It's also, if you follow me on LinkedIn, it's under Shelly Houser, Houser. And I also started my own little business to do this kind of consulting and society education called Inclusive Consulting. And there's a website for that. And there's a Facebook.
What's the website for that?
It is www.inclusiveconsultingservices.com. And there's also a Facebook page under Inclusive Consulting as well. So I'll write simulations. I'll work with simulations. I will help anyone in the world set up and advise them on how to connect with persons with disabilities for their simulations and kind of help them empower themselves and join those communities together, because the disability community and the medical communities really need to, and emergency responders and stuff, they need to talk with and talk to and learn from persons with disabilities so they can be better at their jobs and have a better reaction and not a stigmatized, biased reaction to that kind of thing. So that is my journey and purpose in life, to kind of blend those two and get them to talk a little bit more with some respect and knowledge between each other.
Right, important. All right, Shelly, we'll talk again. Thanks for coming. And Canute Exploration, your topic in the podcast. Goodbye.